Today, we're diving deep into a really significant piece of legislation, one that's set to reshape Turkey's entire environmental and economic landscape. We're talking about the new climate law.
For a while now, the big question has been pretty clear. For a major growing economy like Turkey, how do you actually tackle the climate crisis head on? What's the real plan to turn all that ambition into concrete action?
Well, it turns out the answer is this new, incredibly comprehensive law. And it's not just some single policy. Think of it more like an entire roadmap, one designed to steer the whole country toward a very different kind of future. So let's start with the big picture. Why this law and why right now? Well, the main goal is to tackle climate change by embracing what's called green growth, all while aiming for that big target of net zero emissions. This law didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's really the next logical step on a journey. After Turkey ratified the Paris Agreement back in 2021 and updated its climate pledges, this law is the critical piece that builds the legal framework needed to actually hit that ambitious 2053 net zero target. That term, net zero, is the ultimate goal here. So what does it actually mean? Well, the law is pretty clear. It's not about stopping all emissions completely. It's about getting to a point of balance where any emissions we do create are canceled out by removing the same amount from the atmosphere, mostly through natural helpers like our forests. But, and this is so important, the law isn't just about carbon molecules, it's also about people. And that brings us to another key idea, the just transition. The law makes it explicit that this whole shift has to be fair. It has to support the workers and communities who might be impacted as we move toward a green economy. Okay, so how is Turkey going to get there? The law lays out what you could call a two-front strategy. It's not just about fighting the causes of climate change, but also about getting ready for the impacts that we already know are coming. And here are those two pillars, side by side. On the left, you've got reduction, things like boosting renewables and protecting our forests. And on the right, you have adaptation, which means smarter water management, making our agriculture more resilient, and improving disaster readiness. It's really about tackling both the cause and the effect at the same time. All right, now for what is arguably the most powerful tool in this entire law, the economic engine that's designed to drive all these changes. We're talking about the Emissions Trading System, or ETS. This is the mechanism that finally puts a price on carbon. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine the government sets a total budget for how much pollution the country can create. The ETS is basically the system that manages that budget. And here's the more official definition. The ETS is what's called a market-based mechanism. By setting a cap and creating a market, it puts a price on carbon. And that creates a really powerful financial reason for companies to innovate and cut their emissions. So how does this cap and trade thing actually work? Well, it's pretty straightforward. First, the government sets a limit, a cap, on total emissions. Second, it gives out allowances, where one allowance equals 1 ton of CO2. Third, companies can trade these allowances. If you're super efficient and don't use all of yours, you can sell them. If you pollute more, you gotta buy more. And finally, at the end of the year, every company has to turn in enough allowances to cover what they emitted. It's simple in theory, but really powerful in practice. Okay, a system this big and this important needs some clear rules and referees. So, who's actually in charge of making sure this whole thing runs the way it's supposed to? The law gives us a really clear breakdown of who does what. Think of it like this. The Carbon Market Board is like the board of directors, setting the high-level strategy. The Climate Change Presidency is the CEO, managing the day-to-day operations. APIASH is kind of like the stock exchange, running the actual trading market. And the EPDK is the market regulator, making sure nobody cheats. It's a clear chain of command built to make this market stable and trustworthy. All right, let's bring this right down to the ground level. What does all of this actually mean for the companies that are going to be part of this new system? Well, the obligations are pretty crystal clear. Companies will need a special permit just to operate. They're going to have to track and report their emissions every single year. And, this is the big one, they must have enough allowances to cover every last ton of CO2 they emit. No exceptions. Which, of course, leads to the most obvious question, what if they don't? What happens if you break the rules? Well, this law has some serious teeth. For certain violations, like those involving ozone-depleting substances, we're talking about very large fines. This one, for instance, is 2.5 million Turkish lira. It sends a pretty strong signal that non-compliance is going to be expensive.
But for the ETS, the penalty is where it gets really clever. If a company comes up short on their allowances, it's a double whammy. First, they pay a fine for every single ton they're missing. But, and this is the crucial part, they still have to find and submit those missing allowances the next year. You can't just pay your way out of it. The environmental debt has to be paid. But this whole thing isn't just designed to be punitive. The money that comes in, both from selling the allowances and from any penalties, is all earmarked for a very specific mission. All of that revenue flows directly back into the cause. The lion's share of it will go to funding green transition projects. We're talking clean tech, R&D, you name it. And a dedicated slice is set aside for those just transition activities, like retraining workers for the new jobs in the green economy. When you step back and look at it, this creates this incredible feedback loop. The system makes it more expensive to pollute, and then it uses that exact money to fund the innovation and the social programs we need to, well, to stop polluting. It's a self-fueling engine for change. So if you take away one thing, it should be this. Turkey has officially moved beyond just setting targets on a piece of paper. It has now built the actual legal and economic machinery to actively steer its whole economy toward a low-carbon, resilient, and ultimately a more sustainable future. Really, this law is like the firing of a starting gun. The roadmap is now official. The only question that's left is how quickly this new system will accelerate Turkey's journey. And you can be sure the world will be watching.